Hi, so this is the architectural technologist. We got Ethan, and I'm really pleased to introduce Gus Watt. I've worked with Gus for several years, and I've really been inspired by his architecture, particularly the humorous side of the things that you do, Gus. But I thought, well, maybe first of all, you could talk about how you got started in architecture.
Was this going back to primary school or high school or university?
When did you want to be an architect? If it was at primary school, then why?
All I remember at primary school was that I did a drawing of our school, which happened to be Hutt Central School in Lower Hutt. And I did a drawing of it, which I thought was quite good. But it was somehow or other it was lost or stolen. And I remember in those days we had our assembly. We were outside and we were standing on the grass. The headmaster was on his steps, and he said, "We have a drawing of the school that has been lost, stolen, or strayed, or words to that effect. Has anyone found it?" And of course, no one put up their hand. So I've never found it, but maybe that was what started me off. My father was an engineer, and maybe that was another connection. Anyway, when I started at university, I was a slow starter at university. We had to do physics for intermediate. So my intermediate year was physics, maths, and English. Why I took the maths and the English, I've got no idea. But the only one that I happened to pass in my first year was English. So that wasn't too good. Just a
Sorry.
few years. In my day, the intermediate was a 3-year course. I always say that because I started life there or started in the Ministry of Works. I was a drafting cadet, and they gave you something like 200 a year for your bursary to see you through your first year at university. Anyway, it actually took me 3 years to get my bloody physics. But so they let me in, and they also let in one of my best friends, who is no longer with us either. His name was Graham Robertson, and he was the same as me, 3 years at physics, but he never got it on the third year try either. But somehow or other they let him in. He went on to teach at the school in Auckland, and I think he was teaching down in Christchurch as well. But anyway, that was my start. So I got into university, and it only took me 4 years once I got there because that's all you needed. And then my first year, I joined up with Coffert and Arnold in Wellington, and the big job in those days was the James Cook Hotel. I worked on that and numerous other designs that I was involved in. I can't even think what they were now. Well, one of them was the Victoria University Rugby Club rooms. I did those and miscellaneous other things, can't remember. So I was there for probably 4 years. Then I went to, or maybe it was only 2. Then I went to Horton and Mere, where I was working on CIT at Heratonga and with Chris Brookwhite. Anyway, he's now dead a long time ago, but he was my mentor at Horton and Mere. And so I worked on the CIT, which is a number of buildings up there. It was a new school, lecture rooms and dormitories and libraries, admin buildings, miscellaneous things. So anyway, I was there probably for maybe 5 years. And then I had a chance to work for a developer whose name was Arthur Williams. He was the one that, when he came out from England, he was the sort of developer who was a hands-on man. He would be out there in his car park building pouring concrete in the weekends. He'd be in there in his gumboots and wheeling barrow loads of concrete around. And anyway, so I just had a contract with him for 6 months, which actually finished up being 7 months. But after that, I was on my own. And I must have started with one job, which was just a house on Thames. It was the first house that I did. And then, no, it wasn't the first one because I'd built my own place. What happened after that? I just carried on. Fortunately for me, my wife actually, she was a full-time nurse, and I was just working from home. So I was a bit of a house husband and an architect, if you combine those two. And I just carried on from there. And you do the odd job for starting off, small-scale jobs. And I did quite a bit of work for the Pororua Licensing Trust, which I don't think it exists anymore, but they built a few taverns, and I designed a number of flyers, if you like, for them as well. what else did I do? There, just over the next 40 or 50 years, I just carried on. But as I say, fortunately, Jill was working, and so we survived the ups and the downs. That's how I got started, and I'm probably close to finishing with the last job that I had was a block of apartments. So I think I told you that got the building consent and the builder all set to go, and this was just pre-COVID, and or maybe it was during COVID. Anyway, it was all set to go. Unfortunately, it was going to be worth $2 million less than what it was going to cost to build. So we flagged that, or my developer client flagged it, and in the end, we finished up with 2 years extension of time. That expired, and now it's expired completely at the city council. So there we are. So the rest of my life at the moment just seems to be a couple of rats and mice, as I call them, and maintenance around here, and golf on Tuesdays and Thursdays.
It sounds idyllic. I was curious, you skated over the Ministry of Works part of it. How long were you there?
Oh, yeah. I was probably the first person to be sacked from the Ministry of Works. I was there for 3 years, and then just going part-time doing 1 or 2 units or whatever it was. Well, the first year it was 3 units, then 2 the next year, and 1 the last year. And then, so I went to the school, and with that bursary of, it might have increased to $250 a year or something by then. And in the holidays, I'd be working in the ministry's office. I just finished my 3rd year, and I finished at the ministry and heading to Auckland for my 4th year. And I went in to see the boss then. His name was Gus Watt. He won't be with us anymore either, long gone. And I said, Jack, I don't want to pick up my bursary for this final year. And he said, why not? And I said, well, I don't want to have too much to pay back when I leave. So he said, we might as well leave now then. So I did. And the other fortunate thing about my leaving is I had a friend who was working in the railways, and he was on the same system as me with his bursary from the railways. Anyway, but so I go to leave, and I don't think I actually had to pay anything back because they took into account the fact that I'd worked for them for 3 years. So that's how that happened.
Who was your favourite company to work for, and why?
I don't know whether it was a favourite company. It was just that Ross Brown, who you may have heard of Ross Brown, he's still alive. I was flatting with him in Auckland, and he came to Wellington because he was ahead of me, because he must have done his intermediate in 1 year. So he was ahead of me, and he came to work in Wellington at Cofford and Arnold. And he was involved in the early stages of this James Cook Hotel. And he just suggested that I go and work there and take over from him, basically. Finished up that I think 3 of us who were flatting together at the school went and worked for Arnold, and that was really the only connection. Otherwise, I wouldn't have known who to work for. But the James Cook, that was at the time, that was the biggest hotel and the newest hotel in Wellington for some years, I think. That was about it.
Something we often don't talk about is architecture as business. And I'm curious to see whether after all these years you've got some insight that you could share about running architecture as a business.
That's a very difficult question for me. I'm probably hopeless at business. I suppose when you start off, you're the odd job, and then you get maybe a couple of jobs, and you hope that you're just going to keep on getting one after the other. Then you're getting paid intermittently. You go through all those sessions of people complaining that you've only done one sheet of A1 drawings or A4 drawings, and you're charging me $500 or whatever. That's outrageous. You go through all the things like your mortgages and things and how much you were paying on your overdraft, and got to the stage when you probably won't remember this, but we were paying for our mortgage and any overdraft. I was paying 22%, which was just, you didn't worry about it. It worked in those days, and you didn't worry about it. Anyway, I finally cleared it all, finally cleared the overdraft, and was determined never to have one again. But luckily, as I say, Jill was still working, so we covered things with her payments. I do recall I had one client, quite a good client, whose house I did good for them, and she wasn't paying the bills. or my bills. And so I had to ring her and ask about it, say, can I have some money, please? And she said, oh, I can't give it to you now because I've got it on this term deposit. And anyway, she said, your wife's working, so you should be all right. So I had clients like that as well. Even though if I see her, I still talk to her, obviously. But you get people like that anyway. That's not a good business decision, is it?
I was really curious about the idea that architecture is a business, that it's at some point we have to make a profit, otherwise we can't stay in business. And I was always inspired when I came to see you and teach you at Frederick Street, because you had that beautiful apartment in Frederick Street. And I was wondering if you could tell us the story of how that came about, because that always seemed to me to be quite an astute business decision.
It probably was. I tell you what, I went to years ago, back in the 70s, I went to a lecture by Bob Jones, who was talking about property. And that inspired me to actually go out and buy another house. And then after that, I started looking for other options and thinking about I need a job and finding a building. I found that building, which was on the market, obviously. So I found that and did a very rough scheme. And then I spoke to an engineer who had done some work for me, and he said, go and see Tim Tepaki. He's your man to go and see and take it over. So Tim did take it over, and he bought the building, and so I did all the documentation for 4 apartments. That's all we could fit in. So they were like townhouses. So I did the scheme, 4 apartments. I bought one, Tim bought one, the builder bought one, and we sold one on the market. So that's really how that started. And fortunately, yeah, that was all built, and you could choose your apartment. So I chose the one that was on an internal apartment with party walls on either side, just thinking mainly about insulation, and we'd be much better off, which we were. And they also had a higher ceiling. The building was basically a mansard roof over 3 sides of it, and the rear wall was just right up to the roof, including the mansard sort of roof at the back. So there was only daylight from the street elevation. There was daylight, and so we put in clear stories and a couple of dormers into the mansard roof. But the best part of it was that we managed to get just a lot of daylight in there through the clear story, and sunlight getting in. And in those days, it's probably still the same, where you have to have all the rooms have to have visual awareness. And in those days, anyway, it was visual awareness was you had to be able to look out the windows and see where you are, basically. And so the rear room, or the rear bedroom on the top floor, had a small skylight, and just the way it was planned, you could look from the rear bedroom past the next bedroom at the same level, through the double height space, and out through the windows on the street face. So that was how I managed to get the visual awareness for the rear bedroom, and the council, they were all happy about that. And I would get from the rear bedroom, the skylight. I was the only one that managed to get a skylight in there, which is basically just popped up like a chimney off the flat roof at the back. And my idea then was to get the sun going through that vertical skylight down to the kitchen, which was 2 floors below. And I thought that it might get sunlight on the kitchen bench, which it actually did. I was thinking I would be able to get it on the shortest day of the year or the longest day of the year. I was probably out by a couple of months on that, but it did come through the skylight, which had a mirror backing to it, and down through a glass shelf in the bedroom and onto the kitchen bench. So that was always exciting to see things like that happen, when it was just probably purely by chance. Yeah, well, that's probably about all about that. I had an office down on the street level. You climbed up to the kitchen, dining, living, and then 2 bedrooms at the back and 1 bedroom at the front. And so I had 2 stairs going up, one to the back and one to the front, which were like split the way they were up and going up through the double height space.
I remember being in there. I only went upstairs the once, but it was really lovely with the kitchen, the way that you went from the kitchen was at the back, and then we had I think there was something behind the kitchen, but then there was the kitchen living, and then it opened out onto the balcony at the front. And I remember going there, and it reminded me quite a lot of David Mitchell's house in Hickey Street in Freeman's Bay, that the connection of those things, and then being able to go outside and look outside.
I haven't been to David's house, but I have seen it illustrated. Yeah, that was a very cool house. Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Gus.
Okay.